There is no better way to start today's story than with a quote, and that quote is, "The acquisition gave some staff at Arcane hope that Microsoft might cancel Redfall." So if you're wondering why Redfall didn't really end up being the absolute cracker of a game that we maybe hoped it was, considering it's coming from Arcane and they have absolutely pumped out some awesome content in the past, then yeah, you shouldn't really be surprised. It's a game that stood out, even amongst other games that didn't have a good audience response, because it was just so goddamn confusing. I don't think as confusing as Lord of the Rings Gollum, but it absolutely was up there in just, how did this happen? How did that team make this, from step to step to step, culminating with somebody hitting the go live now, the big red button? How did this happen? That's what we all thought. And now, of course, many people have spoken out to the press. In this case, they have spoken to Bloomberg, specifically to Jason Schreier, and we've got corroboration of things. And this is an absolutely incredible ride that honestly makes it all make sense. To the makers of Redfall, the mediocre reception was no big surprise. The project suffered from unclear direction, frequent attrition, and a perennial lack of staff, according to more than a dozen people who worked on the game. Speaking, of course, anonymously, because they have not been authorized to talk about this shit show publicly. Yes, this indeed was a 5-year-long slow-motion train wreck, and I suppose you're going to see all stages of that train wreck compressed into what we'll discuss today. All right. Let's start with how the hell any of this happened in the first place. And that is the pitch. ZeniMax. Okay? ZeniMax. They're a funky bunch. We've had many great games from underneath that banner, right? I mean, come on. Skyrim, Oblivion, Fallout 3, Fallout New Vegas, Fallout 76. And, that's where things get interesting, because in 2018, they were really trying to pursue games as a service revenue. And per the sources, games as a service was not an absolute mandate, but the implications were that projects that would like funding would almost certainly have an easier time getting said funding if they featured live service, games as a service elements. So Redfall, it was commissioned in this wave, the very same wave that included 2 other notably controversial games. One, Wolfenstein Youngblood. Wolfenstein Youngblood is better in co-op, but is a deeply flawed experience. It is absolutely not playing to the strengths of the development team that made it. Fallout 76 is Fallout 76. We've all talked about that. They have actually stuck with it and done a good job in the core game there, but obviously, probably we all would have been better off if they worked on just about anything else instead. Now, this is when we get to Arcane. In 2017, Arcane released Prey. It's another immersive sim game from Arcane. It is absolutely incredible as a game. It, however, was not a particular commercial success. The typical thing, critically lauded, commercially, not so much. I would say that there are a number of elements to that game on a very big picture setting that maybe make it not the sort of game that is going to find that real mass audience appeal, and I think it very much looks like a situation where Prey is an awesome game. Maybe they could have made it at a lower budget, a slightly different incarnation of this game that would have made sense with the audience that it would one day find, because it is a well-regarded game, as is Mooncrash, which is the DLC to it. Now, these 2 factors happened at the same time. The bigwigs, the corporate bigwigs, they want games as a service. And the last immersive sim from Arcane Austin was not a financial success. Here's a quote. "Leadership across the company wanted to make something more broadly appealing. What eventually emerged was the idea to make a multiplayer game in which users would team up to battle vampires and perhaps pay for occasional cosmetic upgrades." This game would be Redfall. And you look at this and you really see this makes no creative sense as something for this team to make, right? It's very obvious why this does not make creative sense. But you can see all the other things lining up, You've got some limited cosmetics which would allow the team to implement the stores that would ensure that ZeniMax leadership would be down with the sort of idea. You then have multiplayer and co-op, right? You've got some new tech there, you're doing new things. Of course, those games, they retain a little bit better as time goes on. And of course, to set things out a little bit, the supernatural element with the vampires. Now also, this is a game that would be fitting right in alongside those industry trends. You have games like Dead by Daylight, Left 4 Dead, The Forest, many others. So really trying to, as a business case, put this forward. Now, of course, you can see this in the same way that, say, an Ubisoft would pitch it, right? Of like, okay, here is the gameplay genre. Here's, all the different things that we're on paper hitting. Can you not see this is a great business case? And then the second you pitch it to somebody who actually gets excited about games, who wants to experience, something really exciting, something new, something creative and daring, you look at that and you're like, oh, well, that's really mid. Just another one of those with a few twists, really? Where's the vision? That is often how audiences actually receive that kind of thing. But you can see how the Suits would be totally down for that, and also how this absolutely is not something that sounds like the sort of game that Arcane made. I mean, can you imagine the same broad umbrella? You, of course, have Arcane Lyon and Arcane Austin, but under this broad umbrella, do you really think the people who did Dishonored and Prey, that they would be making something that the core Left 4 Dead audience would want? Bizarre. And this leads us to the very confusing initial identity of this game. It was never quite sure what the hell it was supposed to be. From the start, Redfall was pitched to staff as a multiplayer Arcane game, which a lot of people found to be quite confusing. What does that mean? How does single-player RPG immersive sim translate into a multiplayer loot shooter? The idea of making a multiplayer Arcane game as a guiding light doesn't actually drill down on what an Arcane game is. So instead, what happened is that the development, and it's being detailed by this over a dozen sources, as being incredibly chaotic with no clear direction from team leads. And of course, this is something that as members of the public, we all felt, right? That constant sense of confusion over, wait, what is Redfall? I mean, this is an expensive CG trailer, but what is Redfall? It's made by Arcane? This doesn't make sense. To continue, staff members said that over time they grew frustrated with management's frequently shifting references to other games, such as Far Cry and Borderlands, that left each department with varying ideas of what exactly they were making. Through development, the fundamental tension between single player and multiplayer remained unresolved. So this is less of a game, and this is more of a business case. But the actual bit where that turns into a vision of a game, that's never there. And if you do not have vision, be that a team that really knows what they want to make, or be that some sort of, one could even say, visionary, who comes in as like, listen, this is the thing, and everyone gets in sync, and they do that. There can be pros, there can be cons. We can talk about the auteur theory another day, but you get my point. That never seems to have been there. It's a kind of unbelievable thing. I mean, people were building Redfall as a Far Cry game. Other people, other teams, other sub-teams were treating Redfall like a Borderlands game. How do you mash these things together? And how do we have situations where multiple teams, like departments within Arcane, were not in sync over the actual vision, the actual thing that they were making? And this is a large problem for people who, of course, are being asked to make something entirely different to what they have spent years of their life working on. If you're an Arcane Austin, you have been doing support on Dishonored, you've been doing stuff with Prey, and you're now being asked to do something entirely different. And this would prove to be a humongous issue. We are about to see some attrition rates that are genuinely shocking. So, you need people to make a game. Recruitment is hard, right? Now, the problem they had is that Redfall actually wasn't announced. So they couldn't just have job descriptions for Redfall sitting up on their website. This is quite a predicament because they wanted to hire recruits with experience in multiplayer shooters, yet they couldn't really make very large proclamations that they were going into a multiplayer shooter. So the types of people who were applying for a job at their studio were applying because they wanted to make single-player immersive sims, like Dishonored and Prey, especially the likes of Prey and Prey Mooncrash. Like, if you are kind of like a true nerd game designer, like you really, the theory of game design is something you're thrilled about, you're naturally going to be gravitating towards immersive sims, and Redfall is like nearly the opposite of what you want to make. So this meant that the actual new staff with specialist skills that would carry them into this new genre of gameplay, that they basically couldn't really attract those people. Now, you have situations, say Blizzard and their Untitled survival game. Why do we know about that? Well, actually, it's because Blizzard wants to hire staff, and that's why they announced it. As an example, for us, we released Pale Beyond, and with a little bit of recruitment for, like, you know, future stuff, Pale Beyond has been very important for us, because now people are like, oh, that's the kind of game you make. Actually, I'm creatively interested in that. I really want to join up. And now, instead of being like, ah, crap, we're struggling to find people, struggling to do this, actually, because you've made the thing and people know what it is, and people, like, they just know that, and they go to your studio. And so imagine somebody, like, they play Pale Beyond, which, you know, is a very different game to Redfall. And imagine if I said, ah, hello, I saw you liked our narrative role-playing game. Well, I'm making a loot shooter. They're going to run away. And this is something that happened to them. And this must have been an utter nightmare for, I mean, really everybody here. I think especially producers. Can you imagine trying to be a producer on a team where you have massive attrition and you cannot get new people? And to look at that attrition, veteran workers who weren't interested in developing a multiplayer game left in droves. By the end of Redfall's development, roughly 70% of the Austin staff who worked on Prey would no longer be at the company, according to people familiar with the matter, and also Bloomberg's analysis of LinkedIn and Prey's credits. Because that's one of the things. You could just compare the credits, right? You just go to Moby Games, look up the credits, away you go. This is bad. 70% attrition. Is it any wonder that this game was not successful? Now, of course, it's not just that. It's the people are leaving, and you also cannot get new people in. And the new people that you do get in have experience making something that is not what you're trying to make. And then the problem here is this actually wasn't a large studio to begin with. So they really, for what this game is, they started understaffed, and it never got better, likely worse. Even additional support from ZeniMax's Wisconsin-based Roundhouse Studios and other outsourcing houses couldn't fill the gaps, they say. Can you imagine just how scuffed this is? On top of this, there were other external factors outside of Arcane Austin's control. Sources point out that ZeniMax simply didn't pay well on top of everything else. So they're in a situation where they have 70% of their people leaving over the project. They don't have enough money to hire veterans over, and also they're in Texas, and they were having hiring issues with a lot of people who did not want to relocate to Texas. You just have this cavalcade of problems. So this is a game that, from a human resources perspective, was a disaster. From a creative perspective, was a disaster. The institutional knowledge from that studio was systematically destroyed by leadership that had no vision. Leadership that knew that they wanted a big, big money now game, but fundamentally seemed to have misunderstood everything else. But then, look to the west. Who is this atop the hill? It is Phil Spencer with his big bag of money. Are Microsoft going to save them? That is what many people hoped. And it's fair to say that we think overall, Microsoft didn't buy ZeniMax for Arcane Austin. They probably wanted Bethesda. They probably wanted Machine Games. They probably wanted Starfield. They wanted the Elder Scrolls. And in this big bag was also Arcane, these interesting people who make interesting games. Some of them are nice big hits like Dishonored, some of them aren't as big hits like Prey. So Microsoft bought it for those reasons, and that means that it's not really surprising that Microsoft then didn't go in and try to dismantle the thing that they had just purchased. They're just like, all right, they're making Starfield, that's the thing we want, let's not mess it up. And then they just don't pay attention. They just do not pay attention to the other things. And with Phil Spencer's interview with Kinda Funny, we basically were, you know, Phil may as well have just said that. You know, it's like, yeah, we weren't close enough to them. Seemingly, they were just receiving reports and not really looking into things, which is absolutely mind-blowing from a brand management perspective. I've heard some rumors and scuttlebutt that people working underside the Microsoft umbrella are a little bit disappointed in Phil. They're seeing him as being, you know, I don't want to say too conciliatory, but like not having that fucking chutzpah, right? The fighting spirit, the rallying of the troops. Instead, he just looks like a bit of a, you know, a nice guy, but a bit defeated and lame. You know, that's not what Phil Spencer should be exuding. You look at Jim Ryan from Sony, and it's just implicit in his head, I'm Jim fucking Ryan, and our studio is Our studio shit gold. Whereas with Phil, we like Phil. I like Phil. He comes off really well all the time. But it's this just kind of like defeatist, nature. Oh, we'll be fine in the fullness of time as things wither on the vine. Like, that is not leadership. That, leadership is something that is about inspiring people. And he's not really doing that. So yes, it's no wonder then that the hopes that people had at Arcane were absolutely not met. The acquisition gave some staff at Arcane hope that Microsoft might cancel Redfall, or better yet, let them reboot it as a single-player game, according to sources familiar with the production. Instead, Microsoft maintained a hands-off approach. Aside from cancelling a version of Redfall that had been planned for rival Sony Corporation's PlayStation, Microsoft allowed ZeniMax to operate as it had before with great autonomy. Now, there was a suspicion that Microsoft wouldn't, want to be seen as an overbearing company and, and that kind of thing. They, like, oh, we've acquired and then we've slashed and burned and trimmed all the fat and went, maximum extraction. And you can see in a way the idea of like, hey, we're acquiring you. We don't want to mess it up. We don't want to scoop the foie gras out of our creatives. We just, hey, we thought you're cool, that's why we bought you, we want your things, and we're going to support you, but we're not going to get too involved. That is something that we really saw as a good thing for a long time, especially because Microsoft did get themselves a little bit of a reputation as a bit of a studio killer, right? Not really having... Well, you see, I can just say the words Scalebound, and a massive number of Platinum Games fans just, they have some sort of uncomfortable feeling. It's great, I can say it near Matt, and he just goes, ugh. So it's quite sad then that while I think a lot of us were saying, oh, look at this, it's a new Microsoft, they're not getting involved, actually people at Arcane were just sitting there hoping that Microsoft would cancel the game. And from their perspective... you gotta apply the empathy there. From their perspective, what are they seeing? Their colleagues that they've been through the trenches with on games like Prey and Mooncrash, they're dropping like flies. They're seeing the thing that, they're seeing the pirate ship that they've been in the crew for. They're seeing it degrade around them. They are hoping for just a chance for things to change. And it doesn't happen because of seemingly a bit of an uncaring, uninterested leadership from Microsoft. I mean, it just wanted to take Starfield away from Sony, I guess. And one of the things that we had suspected is that the pivot away from having like loads of microtransactions and all that bullshit, that was maybe a Microsoft thing. Maybe the idea that Microsoft wouldn't think that it would be befitting to have a game like that as a first party. Halo Infinite obviously runs against that, but even the previous suspicions that Microsoft had pulled the game in the in-game store out and the games as a service elements away were wishful thinking. For the first 3 years, Redfall had a significant microtransaction plan in place. Only in 2021, with games as a service growing more controversial amongst gamers, did Arcane finally scrap its unwieldy in-game monetization plans. And I guess you could say that to their credit, they were willing to, they seemingly were willing to delay this game until it was ready, because they did delay it so many times. But I think with a constant hope that it would eventually come together. And this is where we get to talk about a certain type of magic. Can you guess what type of magic it is? It's not BioWare magic, because we're not talking about BioWare. It's another type of magic. Along the way, Smith and other leaders assured staff that the game would get exponentially better once the final art was implemented and the bugs were fixed, promising that arcane magic would manifest at the last minute, as it had with their previous games. Now, once again, company magic is not really a good thing to rely on because, funnily enough, it doesn't exist. And it didn't in this case. And ultimately, that is the situation. And as we went through the other stuff with the article, the core here is leadership at Arcane wanted something that was also what ZeniMax wanted. Staff at Arcane did not want the thing that Arcane leadership wanted. This was fundamentally never resolved. This game, therefore, was doomed from the outset. It was set up by a publisher who were chasing trends and leaders who basically felt like they needed a win outside of their niche. So instead of trying to find something within their niche, within their wheelhouse, that they could do, that would resonate with people, they took a look around at the other types of games that were going on in the market and thought, we'll do one of those, we will. Fantastic. People love games as a service. And then this just started a big old Rube Goldberg machine of chaos and the almost complete decimation of the studio's original workforce, only to release a game that absolutely was a dud. This is a slow motion train wreck. It happened over 5 years. And the sad thing is, Arkane Austin, who are actually able to make really good things, like with Prey. How much do they exist? How much is Arkane Austin Arkane Austin? Again, think about the Ship of Theseus. And that is the challenge. The amount of times, and we see this again and again and again, that companies just fuck around with their talent. And then that talent leaves. Nobody should be surprised by this. And if you want to think about, like, why are follow-up games not reliably better than the things that came before? How could this possibly happen? How is this game company not getting better at the thing that it makes over time? Oh, well, maybe if they're losing all their people all the time, that would be why. And of course, we have been in a larger sort of economic environment where quite a lot of poaching, headhunting, that kind of thing has been going on. So there you go. That's the story of Redfall. What can I say? I think that Microsoft should have cancelled this. I definitely agree. It is very easy to say that in hindsight. This is a game that felt deeply off to me from the very first time that I saw its trailer at that reveal. I think at that time it was deeply off to the staff making it, and it never, ever found that fit. Really sad. It would be nice if Arkane Austin could crawl it back. Let's just hope that those people who left Arkane Austin are going to be carrying on that immersive sim banner, and that we will get more like that. That ZeniMax and the leadership of that studio gutted it, chasing money in a completely goddamn foolish way, where I feel like anybody who is a little bit more boots to the ground connected to the games industry could have told them that this was a very stupid pursuit. You know, that they absolutely destroyed the good thing that they had for this is so disappointing. There are other great studios out there. We'll all be okay, but it's just sad. And I suppose it's good that people who did work in that team, who went through all this bullshit, that at least some of them have been able to put their voice out there and get the word out. Now we know, and I think let's hope that this, again, turns the heat up in Microsoft so they can wake up and, you know, actually start performing. It is pretty rough. They've definitely eroded a lot of their brand value. Okay, that's it for me. What a crazy day, and it's going to keep on being crazy because the news stories these days have been mad. You can check the other videos out, and I'll see you next time.